Hi everyone, and welcome to our fourth RPP Forum, the place for all things about getting started and working in research practice partnerships. We'll hear from educators and researchers around the United States about the successes, challenges, and strategies for overcoming those when we get together to solve our most pressing educational problems. It's January 21st, and we're here for our fourth forum. Our topic today is addressing challenges in partnerships. We'll have a conversation about some of the biggest challenges to sustaining partnerships, how to anticipate them, and, when possible, to work through them. I'm Bill Penuel from the University of Colorado Boulder's School of Education, and I'm facilitating this forum discussion with support from the Research Practice Collaboratory, a project funded by the National Science Foundation. I'm very excited today to welcome our invited panelists who bring a range of backgrounds and a wealth of expertise in research practice partnerships. You can find this and all future forum conversations archived at bit.ly/RPP forum. For today's forum, too, I want to invite you to participate on Twitter using the hashtag RPPchat to share ideas that you find interesting and also to pose questions to the panelists. Annie Allen from our team will be monitoring Twitter during the forum and feed us questions from the audience. So I'd like to introduce our participants to you to begin, and I'm going to do that for everybody so that we'll have plenty of time to hear from you. So we have Cynthia Coburn, who's a professor at the School of Education and Social Policy at Northwestern University, here with us today. She studies instructional decision-making in school districts and the role of research in that. Cynthia is leading a William T. Grant funded study that I'm part of on research practice partnerships that's focused on research use in those partnerships. She's also the lead author on a white paper we wrote for W.T. Grant on this topic as well. Lani Horn is a professor in the Department of Teaching and Learning at Vanderbilt University. And Lani studies how to make authentic mathematics accessible to all students, particularly those who have been historically disenfranchised by our educational systems. She's also been part of partnerships with school districts, schools, and teachers, and one of her roles is part of the MIST, our Middle School Mathematics and the Institutional Settings of Teaching Partnership, among researchers at Vanderbilt University, University of Washington, and 2 large school districts, where she's been studying teacher learning in teams in the context of that partnership. We have Jim Kempel, who is the Executive Director of the Research Alliance for New York City Schools and Research Professor at the Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development at NYU, New York University. Dr. Kempel is particularly well known for his work examining high school reform efforts, assessing performance trends in New York City's educational landscape, and designing rigorous impact evaluation. And their work does a lot of incredible work evaluating programs in New York City schools in partnership with them. Sam Severance is a PhD student here in learning sciences and also in cognitive science at the University of Colorado Boulder. And Sam seeks to develop research and design strategies for organizing sustainable research practice partnerships in order to effectively implement educational interventions that are grounded in research on learning and cognition, and to do so at scale. He brings to this conversation his role on the Inquiry Hub project, a research practice partnership between CU Boulder and an urban school district that involves the creation of a digital platform for math and science teachers, aimed at helping them to teach Common Core state standards and also the next generation science standards. So I want to just welcome to all of you. So the way this is going to work is I'll ask some questions in order that we've kind of determined ahead of time until time runs out. And I want to encourage the panelists to ask questions of each other as we get into the conversation, if you wish. And for the first 2 questions, though, we'll go round robin until every person has had a chance to answer, give an answer. So just do a quick introduction of your name and who you are, since I introduced you with the first time we go around. So we'll start with Cynthia, and the first question for all of you is I just wonder if you could briefly describe some of the ways that you've been involved in either developing and or studying research practice partnerships in the past few years. So Cynthia.
Hello, everybody. I'm Cynthia Coburn at Northwestern University, and I've never participated in a research practice partnership. Instead, I study them, and I've done so in 2 different studies. The first study started in 2002, so it was a really early research practice partnership, and I studied the progress of that school district for 5 years. More recently, I studied 3 research practice partnerships along with my colleague Bill Penuel that varied in their approach to organizing research practice partnership and also the school districts that they participated in.
Jim, you want to say a little bit about your involvement in partnerships?
Sure. So I'm Jim Kempel. I serve as the executive director for the Research Alliance for New York City Schools. I'm actually the founding executive director. The Research Alliance was started back in 2008 and established here at New York University with the idea of trying to create the same kind of relationship and production of evidence that had been done in Chicago for about 18 years leading up to 2008. So I've been sort of living on the front lines trying to figure out how you create this from scratch, although with a really strong model and a strong track record established in Chicago. So we've had to think hard about both how you develop the funding, hire staff, build a data archive, build a research agenda that is sort of co-constructed by a combination of researchers, policymakers, practitioners, and other stakeholders in the New York City public education scene.
Thanks, Jim. Lani?
Hi, I'm Lani Horn, and I'm at Vanderbilt University. Research practice partnership's been an outgrowth for me, a kind of an evolution in my own research, which started doing participant observation work back when I was a graduate student at University of California, Berkeley. For my dissertation study, I was studying 2 departments and through participant observation methods, and ended up teaching in one of the departments, becoming a full-blown participant, and that came out of sort of the spirit of partnership, which I can talk a lot about. But so developing a methodology around it and being really deliberate and planful about partnership work has kind of been an evolutionary thread in different projects I've done. When I was in Seattle at University of Washington, we partnered with the Seattle Public Schools as part of a math science partnership, an NSF math science partnership, and did some really close work with a few departments in that district. And then, as Bill said, currently here at Vanderbilt, I've been working on the MIST project for the last 5 years, where we're partnering with 2 urban school districts. So the scale of the partnerships have grown over time in my work, and for me, my role in all 3 of those projects has always been really collaborating closely with teachers and instructional leaders.
All right, thanks, Lani. Sam, tell us a little bit about your involvement in RPPs.
Great, yeah. So I'm Sam Severance at the University of Colorado at Boulder, and as Bill mentioned, I'm working on a research practice partnership called the Inquiry Hub Project. Our most current work, it focuses on understanding how to promote teacher and student agency in our co-design process. As Bill mentioned, we're trying to develop materials to meet ambitious standards like the Common Core and the Next Generation Science Standards. And essentially, we want to understand how to meaningfully allow groups who historically have had little say in curricular matters the opportunity to leverage their expertise to actually impact the design of curricular materials. So in this effort, my role, I'm the research coordinator and the design team manager of the project. So I organize the research efforts. In addition to looking at matters of agency, I try to understand how to optimize the design process itself in order to effectively leverage the expertise of participants. And I also help determine the effectiveness of curriculum materials in terms of promoting meaningful learning experiences for students, but I also participate in the design as well. So I actually work side by side with participants, teachers, and students to develop actual lessons and frame the vision for a whole curriculum. So I guess a lot of what I do, you could say, is designing the design space within our research practice partnership. We have a kind of a unique organization for our RPP. It has a multi-tiered organization. So there's a leadership tier that kind of sets the larger directions for the RPP efforts and kind of organizes the design space for a design tier where the actual design of curriculum materials occurs. And so this differs in that we try to bring forward the intimate knowledge of district-level requirements that need to be integrated into a curriculum. And how these can be reflected in things like lesson plans, district and term assessments, that's what we're trying to figure out with this unique arrangement. And so we work with our district partners to try and integrate these regularly, the needs of the district into this, this setup. So we're also studying design tensions that arise within this sort of unique setup, this multi-tiered arrangement. We've been using a framework from Deb Tater at Virginia Tech. She's used design decisions in her work with software development for educational software. And in our work in particular, looking at design tensions, trying to actively surface them has helped keep focal the concerns of teachers and the ways that they are resisting the work that we're trying to do, which we actually see as a positive thing. Design tensions, they can be quite productive in terms of providing like a choice point for going about design. And we try and address these design tensions during our design process.
That's great. There's a lot to come back to there, so Sam. So one of the things I wanted to highlight here is, so we have a couple of different kinds of partnerships here, and just to highlight that, we have a research alliance represented by Jim and Lani and the MIST project, and Sam here from iHub really represent a design research partnership. And so I invite people to listen for differences in how these different partnerships design may frame what we're going to talk about today, which is challenges. But so in the earlier sessions, we focused a lot on challenges in getting partnerships started. But we have a lot of long-term partnerships represented here, both in terms of what have been studied and that have people have been involved in maintaining them. So I want to focus a little bit on the challenges in sustaining a partnership. What do you all see as some of the biggest challenges to sustaining a partnership? And I'd invite you to give an example and try to also get some examples where partners were able to sustain a line of work, as well as maybe one where a line of work had to disappear in a partnership because you couldn't keep it going. So, and we'll start with Cynthia on this one.
Yeah, I guess the two challenges that I would highlight are that this work is counter-normative. It requires researchers to take roles that are unusual and that we're often not trained to do. And it requires school districts to work with researchers in very different ways. And because the work is counter-normative, it can take a very long time for people to sort of get on the same page about what's the nature of this work and what are appropriate rules and roles and ways of interacting. So for example, in several of the studies, several of the districts that I've studied that are involved in research practice partnership, this counter-normativeness has caused pretty big misunderstandings, miscommunications. People have felt like the researchers were sort of out of line and stepping into spaces that they were not do not belong in. Or we've had a lot of school district leaders tell us, the researchers, we don't know what it is, what it is they do. And this challenge is exacerbated by the fact that there's a lot of churn in school districts. They aren't stable places, as most people know, at least the large urban ones. It's a rare district that has really long-term, grow-your-own kind of leadership. And so what this means is each time there's a new set of leaders at the district level, or even just contact people in a district office, it requires renegotiating and recommunicating about the nature of this work and maybe shifting roles. So this is something that has come out quite strongly in our most recent study, where a research practice partnership, the external research organization, had worked with this district for 5 or 6 years. They had developed priorities together. They had evolved ways of working with one another. And when a key leader came to the district and assumed the role of the main contact, those evolved rules and roles and even the focus of the work together didn't make any sense to this person. And the partnership nearly fell apart, but I think it was from the persistence and patience on both sides, on both roles, to really try to understand what this partnership was about, what it could do to support the district, what were appropriate roles, and they actually needed to shift on the part of the researchers, and what was an appropriate focus of the work together, given a new leader with a new set of priorities.
I want to follow up, Cynthia, really quickly too. So that's an example of dealing with churn. How about all the stepping on folks' toes and breaking expectations? Have you seen an occasion where people worked through successfully, or maybe one where they really it caused the partnership to end, or not work out?
Yeah, I've seen both. In the first study that the first district research practice partnership that I studied, the evolved roles for the external researcher involved actually sort of taking the leadership in sort of professional development for an initiative, and when new leaders came into place, it felt completely inappropriate to them, and it felt like this person was acting out of step, stepping beyond the bounds of appropriateness. And between that and some complications with funding and just general turmoil in the district, the partnership did end after, I believe, 3 years. And this was a district I studied for 5 years, so if anybody's interested, I can talk about sort of what happened after that and what remained after that. In the other district that I'm thinking of, this is one of the districts in the most recent study, I gotta hand it to both the district leader and the researchers involved. They hung with each other as they negotiated and talked and tried to communicate, and the researchers would put forth, here's a different way that we could structure this. No, that's not something we can do, but here's what we can do. And there was, I'm trying to think how long it was. It was probably a good 9 months conversation while the work kind of stalled. It's interesting because one of the district leaders, in talking about the external researchers after this episode, said to us that one of the charms or one of the strengths of the external researchers was that they were actually learners, and that a lot of other external partners that they worked with, they're like, you keep saying the same thing, and I keep saying, no, that's not quite right. And this external partner kept trying and really stuck with it, and was able, with some serious bumps in the road, to come out the other side with a continued relationship and a set of work that seems to be better meeting everybody's needs.
That's great. So the researcher had to be willing to evolve their partnership quite a bit.
Oh, absolutely. And the district leaders needed to also come to understand and respect what they were willing and able to do, and what they weren't willing and able to do. But honestly, the research organization was worked very hard to come up with different ways of thinking about their roles and how they could support the district, and listened really, really, really hard. Took a little while, but they listened really hard to figure out how they could best support the district in their agenda.
Great. Jim, from where you sit, what are a couple of big challenges that you see about sustaining partnerships?
Sure. So, in general, I think of most of the challenges that we face as falling into some version of a balancing act. And there's an expression that the former dean here at Steinhardt used to use called living at the hyphen, where they aren't making necessarily choices or thinking of things as this balancing act as pitting one goal or value against another, but trying to find the right place in between so that you're at the appropriate place on that fulcrum. And that might be the effort to try to balance things like research rigor and sort of policy and practical relevance. Both groups in a partnership, be they the practitioner and policy side or the researchers, value each of those things, but it's not always obvious where one might belong on that point in the hyphen where it's most productive. But one particular challenge that comes up pretty continuously is balancing our roles as collaborators, and you'll hear, I think, of anything throughout the conversation today, common themes. I will probably be echoing many ways much of what Cynthia just said, and I'm sure Lani and Sam will as well. But the other is this balance between being collaborative and independent. And both sides of the partnership really need to preserve some aspect of both of those in the work that we do, particularly with the New York City Department of Education. One example here in New York is we have been working closely with the district as it tries to shift the focus of the system's ways of measuring school effectiveness from an outcome-based school measurement process to one that tries to include much better and more careful and higher stakes measures of school processes and capacities for supporting effective teaching and learning. So we have helped them develop a framework that they call the Framework for Great Schools. It's built off of much of the work that Tony Breik and his colleagues had done in Chicago with the essential elements for school improvement. We've built some measurement instruments around that. And at the same time, that's been a very collaborative effort where we've really worked very closely trying to understand the problems of practice that they want to try to identify inside schools, provide the right signals to schools about sort of where their strengths and limitations are and how they might go about trying to build on the strengths and address the limitations. But at the same time, we've tried to really encourage them being circumspect about how quickly they could roll this out, and maybe even eventually, they're feeling a lot of public pressure to turn this into an accountability system. And attaching high stakes to some of these early indicators and maybe even leading indicators of things for which you might actually hold someone accountable is quite fraught. And so as they exert their independence and try to claim the validation of this work from an organization like the Research Alliance, we've been sort of trying to hold back and say, look, if you want to build this relationship of trust, it would be great if you weren't too far out ahead of us on that thing. At the same time, we have aspirations as a research organization, and this may be something that distinguishes a place-based research practice partnership like the Research Alliance from some of the design-based partnerships where we have a public informing responsibility. Part of our mission is to disseminate information about what works, what doesn't, for whom, and under what conditions in the New York City public schools. And so we do want to publish and be able to tell the public and other audiences about something like the framework, the measurement system, the validity and reliability of some of those measures in a candid way, and sort of hold up some questions that the public and others who are supporting that work may want to know about that. And that, of course, is also fraught from the district's perspective about not wanting to shed too much light on the early stages and maybe some of the limitations of the work that they've been able to do so far. And so they're constantly wanting to rein us in from doing too much public dissemination, not just of that work and others. And so there's this constant effort for both sides to navigate the right balance between our preserving each of our relevant places as independent actors, but also preserving the collaboration that we do in the work on a more day-to-day basis. So, so far that hasn't really been a threat to the partnership per se, but certainly when we have published things that the district sees as reflecting on their work negatively, we get a lot of blowback from that. Not to the point where they're willing to say, "Look, we're not going to do that," but that does help them appreciate the fact that in doing work with us, there is this sort of public-facing responsibility that we have, and that may very well circumscribe some of the kind of work we may be able to do with them over time.
Jim, just to follow up on the independence and collaboration balance, how do you know when you're striking that balance well? And maybe also, how do you know when you're not? Like when, what's going on either in your head or your gut that's telling you, we're not in the right place, or we are in the right place?
It's funny. I'm laughing in part because it's one of those things in part that's you know it when you see it. On the other hand, empirically, I find in some cases when the work being done either and is being consumed either internally among the people actually working on it or externally by the public, where everybody finds something in it that they like and everybody finds something that they don't like. So the more you can find the full range of responses to the work in response to it as it's coming along, the more confident I feel that we're at the right place in the middle of all of those balancing acts. We released a report which we had been vetting and really talking with the department about for a long time on the specialized high schools, which are the the 9 exam-based high schools here in New York City, where the only criteria for getting in is how well you do on this standardized assessment. And we were doing some work trying to help figure out whether other methods of admissions might create a more diverse population of the students in those schools. And we found that there's real limitations on what you could expect from using things like grades or other forms of test scores or attendance or even interviews and that sort of thing, which of course made the advocates for the test super happy that the test wasn't seen as that the test really wasn't necessarily the solution to that or the source of that problem. And on the other hand, made the advocates for other systems, somewhat hopeful that we found a couple of things that might matter. So some people, on both sides of that argument sort of were feeling like there was something in it that they could see their perspectives, which is, we're really not interested in advocating for one thing over another. We want to provide good evidence that where you have something on the table where that's the started point of a discussion rather than trying to end it with the nail in the coffin for one side of the argument or the other.
That's great. Thanks, Jim. And as I turn to Lani and Sam, feel free to speak to not just my general question about challenge, but I'm really curious from a design research perspective, do you see that independence and collaboration balance in exactly the same way, or how does that play out maybe a little bit differently in design research?
Oh my goodness. Okay. So everything that Cynthia and Jim were saying really resonates, both the sort of the nimbleness of that's required to have a successful partnership and the clarity about one's goals while seeking to serve and sustain the partnership. Like that balancing act, I think is really crucial. I think that one thing I want to kind of pick up on that Jim dropped there along the way was, what does it mean to collect evidence around work that's going on, and the different purposes that people can put evidence to? And I would even say beyond just the evidence, like the examples he was using about the exam schools, what does it mean to be collecting data? One of the things that we collected, that I was taking the lead on in MIST, is we collected a lot of data around teacher collaboration. And our purpose in collecting those data, we would go in and videotape purposively sampled collaborative groups. And our purpose in collecting that data was to see if the district's ideas about getting teachers to collaborate to improve instruction were actually playing out. So we tried to sample for functional groups, for people who are collaborating well. But when that all got translated down, sometimes principals wanted us to have the camera in the room to hold teachers accountable for doing what they wanted to be done. So our data collection system got kind of repurposed for somebody else's goals, right? And so we had to manage those tensions. And similarly, we would use different kinds of measures of instructional competence. We had classroom level stuff, we had mathematical knowledge for teaching kind of measures. And we wanted to use those data as evidence of growth over time, to be able to track development and change. And it was hard to sometimes remind our partners that it was not another accountability system for the teachers, and to make sure. So, I mean, districts have this very real problem of scale and of trying to manage what goes on in the classrooms. And here you have people who are going in with cameras, going in and measuring stuff that maybe has a little bit more empirical reliability than you know, the usual teacher evaluation stuff. So they're very hungry to use it toward their goals, and so that was, I think, one of the challenges that I personally had to deal with, in addition to the ones that Cynthia and Jim pointed out. But I don't know. I mean, I could tell so many stories. Ask me a question, Bill, because my mind's going about 5 different directions.
Follow up to that is just how well do you feel like you managed that? How did you manage that to protect your teachers from this becoming another accountability mechanism?
But I think that's where the relationships and the trust and the understanding of you know, I feel like you don't just go in and get to establish your goals and your purposes, and then you're off and then you're running. It's kind of a constant renegotiation. I would say that the other place that came out is we did do some design work around professional development, where we helped co-design with district instructional coaches some work that they could then kind of bring through the instructional improvement system. And it was hard for them to not see us as professional development providers. Like, we had to really kind of go back to that idea multiple times, because most of the time when external people come in and say, we're going to help you improve your instruction, they're coming in as professional development providers. So coming in with this sort of other angle of, no, we want to help you think about how you do the work you do and help you get smarter about that work, but we're not actually going to be doing the professional development providing, that's pretty confusing, right? Because it's not the usual MO of how districts go about trying to improve instruction. So I think that recognizing the need to continually renegotiate, to kind of to understand, like Cynthia was saying, these are really counter-normative roles. There's not a precedent, there's not an archetype or a template that district folks can go off of and go, oh, you're one of those people. So it's easy to get kind of wrapped up and conflated with the usual people that they interact with.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks, Lani.
Okay.
And Sam, what do you see as some big challenges? And feel free also to comment on things that you've just heard folks talk about as challenges as well.
Oh gosh, everybody brought up some really, salient things that I think resonates with our work. In terms of like trying to find that balance of the researcher's role within a research practice partnership. I think in the Inquiry Hub project, we are, very much tied to our partners in the district. We really function as a single unit, I would say, and that that's a strength, but it can also become a weakness in the light of things like Cynthia talked about in terms of district churn. Alan Daly and Kara Finnegan, their work looking at how districts when they have this high turnover rate, it can lead to issues in trying to sustain work. And in our work in the Inquiry Hub project, we have these long-term design projects that can occur over multiple years, trying to develop curriculum and designing it, piloting it, iterating on it, and everything. And if you don't have that champion at the district level to kind of make the case for the utility of your work to the district, then that's a big issue. I think luckily we've had that champion, but we've also experienced a lot of churn with our partner in terms of we've had 3 different secondary science coordinators in the short time I've been on the project. We've had 2 different secondary or big main science coordinators at the district as well in just a short time I've been here, and that that's something that we have to try and navigate each time that happens to ensure that we get that sustainability and that continuity of buy-in and of a champion that's going to help us make sure that our work is continuing, because it does take a while to develop curriculum.
Sam, to what extent do you think that the continuity in the teacher teams provides some help there, and what do you see as the role of the relative role of teachers in the design process and district leaders?
I think it's it's interesting, especially in a multi-tiered RPP, the fact that we have this other tier besides the leadership tier at the district level. We have this design tier that's typically filled with teachers, and having them continually involved in the project, I think that promotes sustainability as well, because you don't have to worry about trying to bring in new people and have them try and contend with a huge learning curve in terms of our design process and in terms of getting on board with the design. So having them on board, I think that insulates us a little bit in terms of creating a buy-in at a different level within the district in order to make our our work more resilient in the face of challenges that might occur at the leadership tier level. So
that's great, thanks. And as we continue with questions, I want to open this one up and just jump in as you wish to answer. So I'm wondering if there are some challenges that when encounter always signal, hey, this partnership is in big trouble, and if so, what are those challenges?
Well, I can speak to one of those that we had when I was working in Seattle, which is that the district's priorities changed. There was a new windfall of money, and it pushed them in a different direction, and our partnership had been really focal to the work they were doing because they were trying to work on instructional improvement in math. That was abandoned by top leadership. So we had our math coaches who were in our corner, but it was very hard to get the attention, the buy-in, the support of the district, who then wanted the schools to engage in other kinds of projects. So our teachers were being pulled in another direction as well. So it's one thing to lose a champion, but it's even worse when there's a lot of money that's sort of inducing them in a different direction too.
Shift in priorities is a big one. What are some other ones that signal trouble?
Bill, I can jump in. So I did. There are a number of quite pragmatic challenges to building and sustaining research practice partnerships, as with any enterprise. But I mean, one that's quite obvious, and it's partly connected to Lani's point, and that's funding. And not just because you need money to pay salaries, collect data, and do the work that we do, but again, for me, this raises another one of these kind of balancing acts in doing this work, and that's about the balance between being very strategic as a research practice partnership, and on the one hand, and being opportunistic. And you need to be both, and you need to find the place in between. And what I mean by that is that it isn't just having funding available, but it's having the right kind of funding available at the moment when it makes the most sense to work into a project. Good research practice partnership work is really one that is co-constructive and responsive, largely, I think, to the problems of practice that the district is trying to solve or address. And those are really, in some ways, episodic, and they're momentary, at least in the grand scheme of things. And that's not just because of changes in administration, but because both as districts identify problems, or schools, even individual schools identify problems, they want to be responsive in a timely way. And in order to get that work done, there needs to be resources on hand that's going to support more than just the implementation and the support for implementing a new program or developing a new curriculum or supporting a new measure of teacher effectiveness. But if you want rigorous research, then resources for the research side of that enterprise needs to be available as well. And that speaks to, I mean, if all the resources that we had were purely unrestricted, we'd have the opportunity to be as strategic as we wanted to be, to focus on the problems that were really front and center at the moment that they're there, to sustain the work on that over the period of time that made the most sense, to build coherence in an agenda of work that would fit together into a whole that's a little bit bigger than the sum of their individual parts. At the same time, we recognize we have to be opportunistic. A funding opportunity comes along from the National Science Foundation. There needs to be an effort to try to sort of build a consensus with the practitioner or the policy community, or in this case, the New York City Department of Education, that, gee, we're really interested in building a stronger initiative around career technical education. A STEM program for NSF might support both the programmatic work and some research around that for both formative and summative purposes. But there we're kind of responding to other people's priorities and trying to fit what our priorities are into that. So in some cases, we have to be opportunistic in order to do good collaborative work, but it may be following another agenda. On the other hand, to the degree that we've got flexible enough resources, we want to be able to be responsive and apply the funding that we have to the problems that are at hand. In addition to, which I'm sure you're aware of, having an infrastructure of support for all of the things that go into doing good, strong research with practitioners that doesn't get paid for directly out of a grant. Building a data archive, our communications function, the development function where you're sort of in between things that aren't necessarily funded yet. All those kind of grants management, all those kinds of things are really quite pragmatic problems that need to be addressed. And without addressing it with the right balance of funding, let alone the sheer dollars, really does threaten the existence of partnerships. And it's a constant challenge that needs to be addressed almost every day, or at least from my perspective, the main thing that keeps me up at night often.
Thanks. Other big challenges that signal a partnership is in trouble: funding.
Well, kind of piggybacking on Jim's comments about the funding. Yeah, it's pretty terrible that sometimes we're tied to these kind of 5-year funding cycles, and we have to kind of worry about the continuity and sustainability of work. And I think that makes the time that you have with that funding even more valuable. So ensuring that, as Jim talked about, that you're actually addressing the problems of practice that are pertinent to your partners is very important. And I think in our work, for instance, we purposely try to attend to that issue and making sure that we are addressing our partners' needs in terms of meeting these problems of practice by trying to look at things like design tensions and developing techniques and devices that attempt to surface these tensions in a timely manner so that they don't fester and that we're not wasting time and money.
I guess the thing that I would add to this is also, it sort of builds on what Jim was talking about with the infrastructure. These partnerships are often engaged in long-term work. They're not doing quick, small pieces of analysis. They're building relationships. They are engaging in a line of work that might unfold over multiple years. School districts need to know sooner than that that this is something that is useful to them and that is value added for them. They don't have time to waste in a partnership that is not going to be helpful to them. And so something I've seen in 2 out of the 4 districts that I've studied is, at a certain point, people start to raise the question of how is this impacted? Like, what are the I want to see impact. I want to see impact on student outcomes, for example. I want to see impact on that something that you co-designed, co-created is at its scale in all of my 50, 60, 70 elementary schools. And so the challenge is that if the work is designed to be very long-term and a program of work, and so much of it is about developing and building the infrastructure, this is something I've had conversations with directors of the RPPs that I've studied about, how a lot of this is invisible work. And so how do you, as a research partner, and also as somebody within a district who has to justify your time and attention to this work to higher ups or to others, how do you create ways of identifying here's an outcome, here's something that we can point to that is a success, here's something we can point to that has improved the problem that we're addressing. And again, I think that that's something that both external researchers have to really think about, but also sort of people on the inside need to be able to tell a story and point to some fairly concrete things often. And just to sort of throw in, something I've seen in some partnerships is trying to balance these very long-term aims with very short-term responses to requests, so that there's some being a good citizen, really responsible when times of crisis and we need something right now, and that's one way to sort of mitigate that, but sort of attending to how, and also to the partnership, how do we know we're making a difference? Because if we're not, maybe we shouldn't continue.
I'm going to give a specific to what Cynthia just described, which is that our project was about instructional improvement, our MIST project, and our idea of what good instruction is something that would grow over time. It's not something that we could, Band-Aid quick fix and have at scale in all the classrooms. And getting all the different levels of partners to buy into that project, especially ones who are under accountability pressures through NCLB, there was some really clear tensions in that, because sometimes when you're trying something new, you get a little bit worse before you get better. And when you are trying to bring up your test scores, we saw a lot of tendency to, especially at the building level, for principals and school leaders to want to revert to kind of traditional drilling of math facts, just to feel like they were doing their due diligence to bring up test scores. And it's really hard to convince anybody in that system, working in that system, that the long-term goal of instructional improvement and more meaningful and substantive instructional improvement should be weighted out when there's the kind of sanctions on the line that NCLB brought with it.
Yeah, both of you and Cynthia in particular, it feels like you're living inside my head. You just raised such a spectacular point about how we measure and demonstrate our impact, the difference that we make, if in fact we do make a difference. I mean, we certainly want to know for our own purposes to ensure that we're making good use of the time and resources that we have at our disposal, and I'm sure our district partners want to know as well. And we've really struggled with this. My question back to you, Cynthia, in some ways is, help us out a little bit. What have you learned and Bill perhaps as well, as you look around the country at the evolving and rapidly growing number of these kinds of partnerships? I mean, what have you learned about what we can say or how we can go about presenting the difference that we make, particularly when research is in the mix? I mean, we know as researchers that it's a really diffuse exercise in translating evidence into decisions, or even into a difference that things make. We know from every study that's been ever done on evidence use, and Bill, I'm sure you confront this in your center in Colorado. It's hard to trace those decisions. So it feels often like when we claim a set of influences that we have, it's far more marketing than it is evidentiary, and we're sort of stuck in the position for our funders and for our colleagues even, or certainly for our partners, with a narrative that we're trying to construct for, in some cases, our own interests. And I often wonder how authentic, how accurate, can we come up with something that we could all agree would represent the difference that we made? For example, what if we hadn't been there? What would have happened in the absence of our work with the district if they had gone about their own way? Help us.
I can't say that I have an answer, but one thing that I've thought I have two thoughts on this. One thing I've thought might be useful, and I've actually never seen anybody do this, so you can try it and let me know. A lot of the partnerships I just know about or that I've studied, some of their agenda is actually a capacity building agenda. It's a capacity building agenda at the district level, or a capacity building agenda in terms of building a data warehouse, or a capacity that the district can use, or a capacity building agenda in terms of part of the work of co-design is to develop teacher leaders. And so one thing that and this is, sort of like, I've sort of idly thought about it, or not idly, but, I haven't seen somebody do this, is that perhaps part of the entree process is to try to articulate, one of the outcomes of our shared work together. is this kind of capacity building, and identify a set of indicators. How would we know if we're moving towards that set of towards that capacity? Develop a rubric, and folks who have survey capabilities. I could imagine collecting data on like organizational health at the school district if that's something that you're interested in. But I think what's really key is being clear at the front end and continuing to kind of evolve it a bit, because people's level of understanding about the nature of this work deepens over time, about what would we expect to see if we had success. And then also I think being pretty clear that like these are long-term things. We're not going to see student outcomes right away. We might, in the case of a design-based partnership, if this is successful, we might start to see these kinds of student outcomes in X number of classes. We then might start to see that this gets integrated into district science policy, just as an example. And then think about, well, what's an indicator that might be occurring? And also perhaps scaling to more and more schools. What's the time frame where we expect to see this? And just trying to, I think it's a really good exercise for researchers as well, because we're not used to doing this, right?
Yeah.
The second thing I would just say, just real quick, and I can talk more about it if anybody's interested in Q&A. One of the things that we're trying to do in our research team is identify ways of sort of measuring impact on policy, ways of measuring impact on decision-making processes. And perhaps if we figure this out, and I think we're coming up with some promising ideas, if we figure this out, then a next step would be ways of adapting that for sort of for partnerships to use. I mean, the kinds of data analysis we're doing for this is like far too labor intensive for people to do while they're doing the work. But the hope anyway is that as we kind of crack this nut, we can then think about ways to not, analyze in detail decision-making observations, for example, to identify some of sort of the ways in which particular ideas or approaches become an important part of the decision-making process.
This is great. And Cynthia, you've queued up next month's RPP forum topic, which is measuring the outcomes of partnerships well. So I think we have raised a lot of open questions. We don't have time to take questions, but I wanted to mention a couple of things in case folks want to respond on social media beyond today. One question is, how do you kind of negotiate this use of data for formative and summative purposes that Lani raised? So important. Can you do that, a little bit of that up front? And really some practical guidance people are looking for that. And I think also just managing the tension of, oftentimes in the traditional role is you bring in the researcher to prove what you're doing is working, to give some justification. So, obviously partnerships have to manage that. So I just wanted to raise these as there are other challenges that I think exist. We're at that point in the forum where I'm going to give each of you, and you're just going to have a minute to give a little advertisement for a resource. This is a chance to share something you're finding useful in your work. We ask people to talk about a book, a reading, a tool they're using, anything that inspires them. And these are resources that are on the Research and Practice Collaboratory site at researchandpractice.org. So look for those resources there, or links to those resources. And we'll also be tweeting links to those resources. So take a minute. Cynthia, if you want to start, tell us a little bit about something that you've shared with us today.
Yeah, so I suggested putting links to articles from one of the early scholars who studied research use in public agencies, Carol Weiss. One of my sort of big messages, one of the big things I've learned from doing this work, is that it's really important to understand the way, in this case, school districts work, the way decision making actually unfolds, the nature of it, who's involved, in order to think about ways of entering into those processes in ways that are both useful to school district leaders and also that have the potential to make a difference. And my thinking has really been shaped in that, and I think we've drawn a lot on it in our research by this early research done by Carol Weiss. I think it provides a really good introduction. I mean, people in school districts, it might help articulate the processes that you live every day. And for people not in school districts, I think it gives a window into how these things really unfold, and that can provide insight into strategic ways of kind of linking into those processes in productive ways.
Great. Jim, what do you have to share with us?
Hang on here. So there's a couple of resources that may not speak very directly to some of the sustainability challenges, though I certainly think they will touch on them. One is this, I think, really terrific report that was done probably now almost 10 years ago, or 7 or 8 years ago, by folks at the Consortium on Chicago School Research, led by Melissa Roderick and her colleagues. It really provides a nice, elegant, I think, overview of what differentiates this kind of work from more traditional academic research. I think they surface a number of the challenges of doing this kind of work in the context of a large urban school district like Chicago. Another resource that's a little more focused on sort of substantive problems that we've worked on here at the Research Alliance is a piece that's called Better Evidence for Better Schools, Lessons from the First 5 Years of the Research Alliance for New York City Schools. And there we just tried to sort of draw out some of the areas that we've worked on. It was really our first crack at trying to get to some of the challenges that Cynthia placed before us about sort of how do you talk about the difference or the outcome of the work that we do here, hopefully surfacing some of the things that's unique about this type of strategy for conducting research in a partnership with practitioners and policymakers that would be different from a more traditional academic model. So both this Chicago Consortium piece called A Model for the Role of Research in Supporting Urban School Reform and the Better Evidence for Better Schools piece that we did here at the Research Alliance.
Great. Lani, what do you have to share with us today?
So a really important aspect of building partnerships with teachers for me is having some kind of street cred, that I am not an ivory tower academic, that I know things about their work conditions, and I'm just not another person trying to sell a silver bullet. So I find it really important, since I taught in the mid-90s to early 2000s, you know, and a lot has changed in the teaching landscape. I really have to keep up with teachers' lived realities. So I really turn to social media as part of why I'm so active on Twitter. I'm a participant in a couple of teacher communities there, EduColor, which is a group of educators who are seeking to address issues of diversity in schools, and what's called MITBOS, the math Twitter blogosphere. So I hear and keep teachers' voices in my head all the time and learn their day-to-day work. In terms of more established publications, I like to keep my eyes on EdWeek. I like to keep my eyes on some of the policy think tanks, just so I have some of the kind of broader landscape issues in mind, so I can be a resource to the teachers that I interact with.
That's great. Sam?
Okay, looks like we only have a little bit of time left here. And I'm used to that because I focus on the design aspects. So in terms of design, yeah, time is definitely a challenge. And I think trying to find tools that can make the design process more efficient are things that I've kind of focused on. There's one thing we've been using in our co-design process. It's a STEM teaching tool from Phil Bell's group at UW called Practices Should Not Stand Alone, How to Sequence Practices in a Cascade to Support Student Investigations. And that's really been helpful for us to kind of provide an easily accessible research-backed piece that teachers can take up in the design process in order to make things move more quickly. So.
That's great. So thank you all for being here today. And you can continue this conversation on Twitter using the hashtag RPPchat. And you can find, again, all these resources mentioned today on the Research and Practice Collaboratory website at researchandpractice.org. And Research and Practice is all one word. And you can also follow the Research Practice Collaboratory on Twitter at RP Collaboratory. The Research Practice Collaboratory is funded by the National Science Foundation, and all views are those of our panelists and not of our funder. We hope that you will join us next time on Thursday, February 18th, same time at 3 p.m. Mountain for our next forum, and the topic will be measuring the impacts of partnerships. And you can pose questions ahead of time to us on Twitter using the hashtag RPPchat. We'll be talking then with Phil Darrow, Aaron Henrick, Elaine Allensworth, and Jen Russell. And that's it for this, our fourth Research Practice Partnership Forum, where we are researchers and educators working together for a better, more equitable education system for all our nation's young people. Thank you to our panelists and to our audience today.